The cold, hard truth we must confront is that modern humanity is suffering from a massive structural breakdown, a silent epidemic of neurosis that infects the very core of our social architecture. Look around you. You see exhaustion, not the satisfying fatigue following honest labor, but a deep existential weariness, a constant low-grade fever of the spirit. People believe this is merely stress, or perhaps physical burnout. They are wrong. This isn't just burnout. It is systemic failure. It is the psychological toll of fighting your own nature. We live in an age where the directive is relentless. Be successful, be happy, be optimized. We are trained from birth to construct an immaculate social mask, the persona, that is designed to comply with societal expectations, to secure status, and to avoid friction. We are taught to suppress anything that conflicts with this polished image. Instinct, doubt, raw emotion, and the inevitable darkness that resides within. And so, the modern individual pours all their available psychic energy, their very life force, into maintaining this elaborate facade. They do everything right. They secure the job, the partner, the status symbols, yet they feel empty, restless, and increasingly hostile toward the world that promised them fulfillment. Why? Because the persona is a necessary function, a bridge between the ego and society, but it is not the self. When the individual becomes utterly identified with the mask, when the persona swallows the seek, the structure becomes rigid, brittle, and incapable of processing genuine human experience. The man who is only his job title, the woman who is only her social approval rating, they have committed a form of psychological suicide. They have sacrificed their internal reality for external validation. And here is where the danger truly begins. Psychic energy, unlike physical energy, cannot be destroyed. It must go somewhere. Everything that is repressed, the doubt, the anger, the raw sexual instinct, the capacity for ruthlessness, the desire for genuine solitude, is instantly banished into the unconscious. This material does not simply vanish. It coalesces. It gathers strength and autonomy, forming what I term complexos autonomos. These are fragments of the self that have been cut off, armed with their own energy and volition. They function like foreign bodies, like tumors in the psyche, demanding expression. These complexes are the true source of modern neurosis. They are the unseen puppeteers behind self-sabotage. When the conscious ego attempts to move toward a genuine breakthrough, individuation, the complex, which is rooted in the trauma of the past, perceives this change as a threat to its own existence within the unconscious structure. The complex sabotages the victory, not out of malice, but out of a perverse need for homeostasis. It needs the familiar pattern of defeat to keep the repressed content safe and contained. This is why we see the pattern of implosion, the sudden irrational argument that destroys a relationship, the accidental missed deadline for the promotion, the inexplicable physical illness that strikes right before a major presentation. These are not coincidences. They are the autonomous complexes asserting their will, hijacking the nervous system and the conscious decision-making process to maintain the cycle of defeat, because defeat is known. Victory requires transformation, and transformation requires the death of the old neurotic structure, a death the complexes resist violently. The result of this mass repression is the prevailing atmosphere of generalized anxiety and the inability to tolerate the fardo of consciousness. We have created a society that pathologizes the very things required for psychological health: depth, silence, and the integration of the sombra. Modern man flees the necessary solidão required for self-examination, terrified of confronting the autonomous complexes lurking in the dark corners of his own mind. Instead, he seeks refuge in the comforting conformity of the massa. The flight into the mass is the most insidious symptom of our collective neurosis. When the individual cannot carry the weight of his own sombra, he projects it outward. He cannot accept his own capacity for darkness, so he projects it onto the political opponent, the foreign nation, the ideological enemy. The complex is then externalized, and the individual feels temporarily relieved because the problem is now out there. This is the psychological mechanism fueling the brutal fragmentation and conflict we observe globally. The world has become a giant mirror reflecting the unintegrated, repressed contents of the collective unconscious. We are not fighting external enemies. We are fighting the distorted reflections of our own psychological refuse. This is the deadly cycle. Repression feeds the complex. The complex asserts autonomy. The resulting failure drives the ego back toward the safety of the persona. The persona demands more repression. The individual becomes trapped in a neurotic loop, perpetually exhausted, perpetually projecting, perpetually on the verge of a full mental breakdown. This is not a moral failing. It is a structural illness, a failure of the ego to mediate between the external world and the terrifying, powerful reality of the internal world. The terrifying reality is that the seek demands integration. If you refuse to consciously integrate the repressed contents, if you refuse to look into the abysmo and claim your own darkness, the unconscious will eventually force the issue. It will orchestrate a crisis, a breakdown, a collapse of the persona so catastrophic that you are forced finally to confront the autonomous complexes that have been running your life. This is the moment of reckoning, the necessary destruction that precedes any true restructuring of the self. The modern imperative to be perpetually positive, to avoid pain, to maintain the flawless facade of the persona, is not a path to health. It is a direct route to psychological ruin. The only way forward is through sacrificio, the conscious surrender of the false self. It requires the cold, precise recognition that the life you have built, the one designed for external approval, is likely the very cage holding you captive. This process of individuation, the attempt to integrate the sombra and assert the true center of the self, is the heaviest fardo a human being can undertake. It is a lonely, brutal, and often terrifying journey that demands absolute honesty and the willingness to stand apart from the compliant massa. But the alternative is certain: to remain stuck in the cycle of neurosis, perpetually exhausting yourself by fighting shadows that are, in reality, autonomous fragments of your own repressed self. You must choose the painful reality of self-confrontation or the slow, comfortable decay of psychological servitude. The choice is urgent because the structure is failing and the time for superficial fixes has passed. We are witnessing the prelude to a collective mental breakdown, fueled by the willful ignorance of the objective reality of the human seek. Wake up. The silence is deafening, and the complexes are preparing their final move. The cold, hard truth about modern existence is that most people are not living their own lives. They are merely animating a facade, a psychological construct built for the approval of the massa. I call this structure the persona. Do not misunderstand the term. The persona is not simply a social mask. It is a rigid, specialized, functional complex of the seek developed out of necessity. It is the compromise between the individual and society, the face we present, the role we play, designed to guarantee employment, social standing, and, most crucially, to shield the fragile ego from the relentless demands of the world. It is a suit of armor, but armor is inherently heavy, restrictive, and isolating. The critical danger is not the existence of the persona itself. Some degree of adaptation is required for survival, but the catastrophic error of identifying with it entirely. When a man believes he is his job title, his reputation, his bank account, or the flawless image he projects onto social media, he has committed psychological suicide. He has exchanged the infinite complexity of his true self for a finite, brittle structure designed purely for external consumption. This identification is the genesis of all serious neurosis. The seek is an objective reality operating under strict laws of compensation. Nature abhors a vacuum, and it certainly abhors imbalance. If the conscientia dedicates all its energy to maintaining a highly specialized, one-sided persona, say, the perpetually cheerful caregiver, the infallible corporate executive, or the morally pristine citizen, all traits, instincts, and capacities that contradict this idealized role must be ruthlessly suppressed. Where do these repressed contents go? They do not vanish. They are forced into the shadows of the inconscient pessoal, forming the sombra. The sombra is the objective counterweight to the persona. The cleaner the mask, the filthier the shadow. The more moralistic the conscious attitude, the more brutal and primitive the repressed instinct becomes. This rejected material, the raw, undifferentiated human capacities for aggression, sexuality, power, and genuine imperfection, coagulates. It gains density. It gains energy. Eventually, it gains autonomy. This is how complexos autonomos are born. They are fragments of the self that have been violently cast out, now possessing a will and energy of their own, operating entirely outside the control of the ego. They become the ghosts in the machine, the saboteurs that undermine every attempt at authentic success, the source of irrational fears and compulsive behaviors. When the executive who prides himself on his absolute control suddenly erupts in a fit of unprofessional rage, that is the sombra asserting itself through a complexo autonomo. When the moral Puritan finds himself compulsively addicted to perverse behavior, that is the repressed instinct breaking the dam. This is not weakness. It is the inevitable consequence of psychological repression. The structure must be balanced, and if the conscientia refuses to integrate the darkness will eventually take over the structure entirely. The identification with the persona leads to a profound and deadly disconnection from the internal landscape. The individual becomes an echo chamber, sensitive only to external feedback. He stops listening to the subtle, necessary signals from the inconscient, the dreams, the gut feelings, the irrational urges that are attempts by the seek to re-establish equilibrium. He sacrifices his inner life for the sake of outer appearance. The result is a devastating superficiality. When a man is nothing more than his persona, he is incapable of navigating the objective reality of suffering, loss, and the inevitable decay of all external forms. He has no internal reserve, no estructura psichica to fall back on when the external world fails him. He has built his house on sand, and what happens when the persona fails? It always fails. The body ages, the career ends, the social trends shift, the reputation is shattered. When the external structure that defined his existence collapses, the individual experiences a catastrophic psychological breakdown. He finds that there is nothing substantial underneath the mask, just the raw, untamed sombra and the terrifying emptiness of unlived life. This is the moment when the neurosis transitions into full-blown crisis, characterized by profound anxiety, depersonalization, and the chilling realization that he has wasted his entire existence serving a lie. The modern environment actively encourages this fatal identification. We live in an age obsessed with image and performance, where authenticity is seen as a liability and vulnerability is viewed as incompetence. The massa demands conformity, and the price of nonconformity is social ostracization. Thus, the individual is coerced into reinforcing the persona until it becomes a prison, isolating him from his own instinctual roots and the necessary grounding provided by the inconsciente collettivo. This isolation is the true solido, not the physical absence of others, but the terrifying chasm between the conscious self and the objective reality of the seek. To embark on the path of individuação requires the conscious sacrificio of the persona. It means dismantling the carefully constructed mask, piece by painful piece, and accepting the fardeau of becoming genuinely oneself, flaws, contradictions, and all. This is why most people prefer the comfortable neurosis of the mask. To drop the persona is to invite conflict, not just with the external world that relied on your predictability, but with the internal complexos autonomos that will fight viciously to maintain their structure. The ego must surrender its claim to absolute purity and perfection. It must face the sombra and begin the arduous, disgusting task of integrating the repressed contents. This is a messy, unglamorous process that often looks like a temporary regression, a period of darkness where the individual feels less competent, less stable, and profoundly uncomfortable. Most people panic at this stage and rush back to the safety of the old mask, guaranteeing the return of the same cyclical pattern of defeat and self-sabotage. You must understand this mechanism. The structure of your life is determined by what you refuse to look at. Every time you project your own greed onto a politician, your own incompetence onto a colleague, or your own rage onto a partner, you are reinforcing the persona and empowering the corresponding complexo autonomo. You are outsourcing your psychological responsibility. The refusal to carry the fardeau of your own darkness means you are destined to stumble, perpetually tripping over the contents of your own sombra, which you refuse to recognize as yours. This is the definition of a life lived in a state of psychological servitude. We are witnessing a collective epidemic where millions are suffering the collapse of their socially engineered personae, They are hollowed out, addicted to distraction, terrified of solitude, and utterly unprepared for the confrontation with their own internal reality. The pressure is mounting. The inconsciente is no longer sending polite notes. It is generating explosive psychological crises to force the consciencia to pay attention. The failure to integrate the sombra and dismantle the rigid persona is not merely a personal inconvenience. It is a guarantee of individual ruina. The time for playing games is over. Look behind the mask. You find nothing but emptiness, then the work must begin now, before the complexos autonomos finish the job and claim the entire seek for themselves. The price of pretending is steep, and the bill is always paid in the currency of mental health. Now, we must confront the cold, hard truth about what is actually driving the epidemic of modern neurose. People suffer under the illusion of free will, believing themselves to be the master of their own ship. This is a fatal misconception. The clinical reality is far more brutal. Most individuals are not the driver of their own life. They are merely a bewildered passenger, strapped into a vehicle being steered erratically by forces they refuse to acknowledge. These forces are the complexos autonomos. They are not ghosts or entities. They are hard, structured psychological facts. Think of a complexo autonomo as a dissociated fragment of the seek, a collection of emotionally charged ideas, memories, and instincts that have crystallized around a core trauma or powerful emotional experience. When the consciencia fails to process an event, when the pain is too great, the shame too toxic, or the instinctual drive too overwhelming, that material is violently ejected, repressed, and sealed off. But repression does not dissolve the material. It merely gives it independence. This autonomy is the terrifying element. These complexes gain a life of their own. They possess a distinct energy charge and a specific intention, entirely separate from, and often hostile to, the conscious ego. They are psychological tyrants operating in the dark, hijacking your attention, distorting your perception, and dictating your behavior. When a complexo is activated, by stress, proximity to an original trauma, or even a casual remark, it temporarily seizes control of the consciencia. The result is that familiar, sickening feeling of internal contradiction. The moment you knew you should remain silent but heard yourself screaming. The moment you knew you should save money but found yourself compulsively spending. The moment you were offered the breakthrough but manufactured a crisis to derail it. That was not you. That was the complexo autonomo in the driver's seat. It is a psychological seizure. The conscious ego is relegated to the back seat, watching in horror as the autonomous fragment executes its destructive, repetitive pattern. This is why the cycle of self-sabotage feels so mechanical, so inescapable, because it is being run by a mechanism, not by deliberate choice. The failure of modern society is its insistence on treating these manifestations, addictions, anxiety attacks, sudden bouts of rage, as isolated malfunctions, rather than symptoms of a structural failure within the seek. We are dealing with functional entities, psychological organs that have broken off from the central regulating system. They use the consciencia as their instrument, forcing the individual into patterns of behavior that ensure the complex's survival, even if it guarantees the individual's ruina. Consider the victim complex, a crystallization of early helplessness and resentment. It is designed to attract sympathy and deflect accountability. When the individual approaches a moment of genuine power or success, the victim complex, fearing its own dissolution, will trigger an immediate catastrophic self-sabotage. It will push away the supportive partner, insult the potential employer, or simply induce a profound, paralyzing exhaustion. It operates with a cold, ruthless efficiency, prioritizing the survival of the complex over the health of the host. This is the central diagnostic point for neurose. The ego believes it is in charge, but the complexos autonomos hold the real power, diverting massive amounts of psychic energy. They are the reason you feel perpetually drained, constantly fighting yourself. Every time you attempt a conscious change, a new habit, a commitment to individuation, you are met with immense internal resistance. This resistance is not laziness. It is the autonomous defense system of the complexes protecting their territory. They fight like cornered animals because integration means their psychological death. The more significant the trauma that formed the complex, the greater its autonomy, and the more convincing its camouflage. Many of these complexes are rooted not just in personal experience, but draw energy from the inconsciente collettivo, the vast reservoir of shared human experience, instinct, and archetype. When a personal complex aligns with a powerful archetypal theme, say the tyrant, the shadowy father, or the devouring mother, it gains colossal, overwhelming power. This is when individual neurosis can spill over and contribute to collective psychosis. Look at the massa today. What is happening on a collective scale is merely the macro projection of internal individual failure. When millions of people refuse to confront their personal sombra, their jealousy, their rage, their powerlessness, that repressed material floods the public sphere. It attaches itself to political figures, to ideologies, to social movements. The individual, relieved of the fardeau of owning their complexes, can now happily project them onto the external enemy. They are the greedy ones. They are the incompetent ones. They are the source of all evil. This is the mechanism of hysteria and polarization. The complexos autonomos are externalized, creating psychological warfare in the street. People are not arguing about policy. They are possessed by internal fragments seeking external battlefields. They are trying to destroy the enemy outside to avoid the painful, necessary confrontation with the enemy within. The whole world is acting out the unexamined contents of the individual, inconscient. The terrifying conclusion is this: if you do not integrate your complexes, they will integrate you. They will consume your conscientia, piece by piece, until your life becomes a rigid, predictable, and ultimately self-destructive loop, a perpetual compulsion à répétition. You will cycle through the same emotional crises, the same failed relationships, the same near victories followed by swift implosion, until you hit the psychological wall. The true work of individuation is nothing less than psychological surgery. It requires a fierce commitment to solido and silencio, creating the necessary internal space to hear the autonomous voice of the complex without immediately acting on it. It requires the sacrificio of your comfortable identity, the persona, that insists you are a rational, unified being. You must accept that your seek is a dangerous structure populated by internal adversaries. The first step is simply to stop the projection. Pull the sombra back. When you feel that surge of moral outrage against someone else, stop and ask, where does this quality reside in me? What autonomous mechanism inside me is demanding this external scapegoat? This is the point of rupture, the moment the passenger decides to seize the steering wheel back from the tyrant. This process is not gentle, it is brutal. It is not about feeling good, it is about becoming whole. It means facing the psychological death of the person who was comfortable losing and accepting the enormous fardeau of accountability that comes with winning. You must become the conscious vessel capable of containing your own internal contradictions. Most people will refuse this work. They will prefer the familiar comfort of neurose and the easy distraction of the massa. They will continue to be driven by their complexes until the structure collapses. But for those who are ready to face the abyss, who are ready to become the surgeon of their own seek, the time for the operation is now. The alternative is ruina. Do not wait for a wake-up call. The collapse of your integrity is the alarm bell already ringing. The collapse of integrity is already ringing, yet most people prefer to keep sleeping. They cling desperately to the illusion of moral superiority, a symptom of the most dangerous psychological mechanism, projection. You want to know why you are losing? It is because you are addicted to externalizing the blame. You refuse the fardeau of self-knowledge, opting instead for the cheap relief of finding fault outside your own seek. This is not a moral failing. This is a catastrophic failure of containment. It is the core neurosis of the modern age, the inability to hold one's own darkness. Look closely at the figures you despise most intensely: the politician, the competitor, the ideological opponent. The qualities you find intolerable in them, the malice, the incompetence, the sheer capacity for betrayal, are precisely the contents of your own sombra that you have refused to integrate. You are not seeing the other person clearly. You are seeing a convenient dumping ground for the psychological filth you cannot bear to acknowledge in yourself. This is the cold, hard truth. The villain of your story is not outside the window. He is standing in the shattered glass of your own seek. The unconscious mind is ruthless. It cannot tolerate moral contradiction. If you insist on maintaining a pristine, rational persona, the image of yourself as the good, unified, suffering victim, the repressed material, the sombra, must go somewhere. It does not vanish, it gains autonomy. It detaches and manifests as complexos autonomos that demand external representation. We do not project our weaknesses onto strangers. We project our repressed power, our unacknowledged cruelty, and our terrifying capacity for chaos onto those who are psychologically close enough to serve as a mirror, yet distant enough to be safely attacked. When you feel that surge of righteous moral outrage, that wave of visceral condemnation, stop. That intensity is not evidence of objective truth. It is the kinetic energy of your own repressed contents seeking release. It is the unconscious demanding an external scapegoat. This is the psychological mechanism that tears societies apart. When millions of individuals refuse to look inward, the collective neurose manifests as shared paranoia, ideological fanaticism, and the relentless search for an external enemy to justify internal suffering. It feels like justice. It is, in reality, a collective psychological suicide. You are sacrificing reality at the altar of your comfortable self-image. This pattern of projection is why winning remains impossible. If you project your weaknesses, you remain blind to the levers of control within your own life. If you project your capacity for brilliance, you remain incapable of claiming your own power. You essentially hand the key to your success and your failure to external figures. The very people you claim are holding you back. This is the ultimate abdication of individuation. If you wish to break this cycle, the surgery must be precise and painful. You must deliberately halt the automatic process of projection. Every time you feel the urge to condemn, criticize, or blame, you must force the energy back inward. Ask the brutal question: what autonomous mechanism inside me is demanding this external enemy? Where does this capacity for betrayal reside in my own estructura psichica? This is where the true sacrificio begins. It means admitting that the chaos in your life is not a random occurrence, but an expression of the unintegrated chaos within your own mind. It means accepting the terrifying realization that your victimhood is largely self-imposed, maintained by the constant refusal to own the contents of your sombra. The path of individuation requires you to become the conscious estructura psichica, capable of containing all your contradictions, the hero and the villain, the competence and the incompetence, the light and the dark. You must stop seeking external salvation or external damnation. Both are illusions designed to keep you in perpetual psychological infancy. The analyst observes this pattern repeatedly. Patients approach the verge of breakthrough, ready to claim their competence, ready to shed the old, losing identity. And then, the complexos autonomos panic. The repressed material screams, "If he wins, we lose our safe hiding place." The psyche then manufactures an external crisis, a fight with the boss, a betrayal by a friend, a sudden illness, to justify a return to the familiar, comfortable neurose of victimhood. The projection is the ultimate defense against accountability. It allows you to feel righteous while remaining psychologically impotent. You get to keep your pain, which has become your identity, and you get to keep the illusion that you are a good person being wronged by a bad world. But this comfort comes at the cost of your very existence. You are trading reality for a convenient narrative. To win, you must dismantle that narrative. You must recognize that the world is not conspiring against you. Your own unconscious is operating against your conscious goals. Until you retrieve the projected energy and own the power and the poison within, you will remain a puppet, dancing to the tune of the complexos autonomos that you refuse to name. The time for self-pity is over. The time for clinical confrontation is now. Stop looking outward for the cause of your stagnation. The psychological operation required is an act of radical self-ownership. It is the acceptance of the enormous fardo that comes with consciousness. If you refuse this confrontation, the pressure will continue to build, the neurose will deepen, and the inevitable result is ruina, the collapse of the psyche under the weight of its own unintegrated darkness. This is not a threat, it is an objective diagnosis. You must become the surgeon of your own mind, or you will become its casualty. There is no middle ground. The choice is integration or disintegration. Choose wisely, for the silence of the unconscious is merely the calm before the breakdown. You have reached the precipice. The psychological operation required now is not about finding comfort or chasing transient happiness. That is the delusion sold by the massa, a collective hallucination designed to keep you asleep. The task now is individuation, and it is a brutal, solitary process. It is the final confrontation with the self you have spent your entire life avoiding. Individuation is not about becoming better, it is about becoming whole. And to become whole, you must integrate the shadow, the cold, hard truth of your own psychological poison. Most people believe victory is achieved by eliminating their negative traits. This is a fatal error. You cannot eliminate the shadow, you can only integrate it. The shadow is not merely the repository of petty flaws, it is the living potential for evil, for malice, for calculated destruction that resides in every human seek. If you repress this capacity, you do not become a good person. You become an unconscious carrier of that destruction, projecting it onto the world, seeing demons in your neighbors while your own internal complexos autonomos run the show. The man who refuses to see his own capacity for cruelty is the first to commit it, blindly, cloaked in the righteousness of his persona. To win, you must retrieve that projected power. You must look into the abysmo of your own heart and accept the fact that you too have the capacity to lie, to manipulate, to crush, and to destroy. This is the ultimate fardo of consciousness. You must hold that poison in your own hands, cold and heavy, and know that you are responsible for controlling it. This is the only way to neutralize it. When you own your own darkness, it ceases to own you. This acceptance is the psychological sacrifice required for victory. This is why true individuation is so terrifying. It means you can no longer play the victim. It means you are fully accountable. You have integrated the strength to succeed, but you have also integrated the potential to fail spectacularly and maliciously. The moment you accept the shadow, you step out of the comforting, neurotic embrace of the massa. The collective relies on shared projection. We agree on who the enemy is so we don't have to look at ourselves. When you stop projecting your shadow onto the external world, you become psychologically isolated. This solitude is the price of consciousness. And this brings us to the core defense mechanism required to maintain this integrated state, the cultivation of what I termed the santa indifferenza, holy indifference. When you begin to shift your center of gravity from the external world to the internal reality of the seek, the world will react violently. Society, the massa, your family, your social circle, they are all invested in your old persona, in your old pattern of defeat. They need you to stay small so they can continue to feel large. They need your neurosis to validate their own. When you stop playing their game, they will try to pull you back into the collective neurosis. They will provoke, demand reaction, and attempt to re-establish the old padrón inconsciente through guilt or accusation. Your defense must be the santa indifferenza. This is not apathy or emotional numbness. It is a clinical detachment from the external demands and judgments of the massa. It is the realization that the opinions of others, and even the turbulent, neurotic drama of the day, are merely noise, distractions from the singular, difficult task of becoming yourself. You must learn strategic silence. The seek has a limited reserve of energy. Every time you engage in a meaningless argument, every time you defend yourself against a projection that is not yours, every time you seek validation from the outside, you deplete the energy required for internal integration. The complexos autonomos thrive on noise and reaction. They want you to scatter your energy. They want you distracted by the political circus, the social media frenzy, the petty grievances. Because if you are busy fighting the illusion outside, you will never have the clarity or the strength to confront the terrifying reality within. Silence is not emptiness. It is a container. It is the necessary structure in which the disparate parts of the self, the sombra, the persona, the conscious ego, can finally negotiate a truce. By refusing to react, you conserve the psychological energy necessary to maintain the fardo of your new integrated identity. This strategic silence is your psychological armor. Let the world scream. Let the massa chase its collective tail. Your focus must remain surgical, fixed on the internal landscape. The final stage of individuation is the realization that the work never truly ends. It is a constant, conscious effort to prevent the collapse back into unconsciousness. The danger of ruina is ever present. Every major breakthrough is followed by a period where the newly integrated self is fragile, vulnerable to attack from the repressed contents of the inconsciente pessoal and the overwhelming pressure of the inconsciente collettivo. You must understand that the modern world is actively conspiring against individuation. The technology, the media, the relentless pursuit of distraction, these are all mechanisms designed to dissolve the individual into the collective. The massa prefers the neurotic comfort of belonging over the terrifying responsibility of self-awareness. If you choose to win, if you choose consciousness, you are choosing to stand alone. You are choosing the path of the physician who must perform surgery on himself. The alternative is psychological suicide. If you refuse the confrontation, the unintegrated contents will eventually overwhelm the fragile structure of the ego. The pressure cooker feeling, that urgency you sense, will not dissipate gently. It will build until the seek fractures. This is the origin of the modern epidemic of neurose and mental breakdown. It is the sound of millions of people giving up the enormous fardeau of consciousness and dissolving back into the primal soup of the collective. Do not let yourself become a statistic. The signs are clear. The opportunity for breakthrough is real, but it demands a ruthless honesty that few possess. You must stop looking for easy answers. You must stop waiting for external salvation. The only thing that can save you is the terrifying, powerful, and integrated self that you have repressed for so long. Stop procrastinating on your own existence. Stop clinging to the comfort of your old defeat. The time for analysis is over. The time for action is now. Face the shadow, embrace the solido, and accept the cold, hard truth. You are responsible for everything that happens next. This is not a request. This is the final diagnosis. Wake up or be wiped out. The refusal to integrate the shadow, the terror of success, is not merely a personal weakness. It is the core mechanism of modern psychological collapse. It is a structural flaw, a willful retreat from the fardeau of self-sovereignty. When you refuse to carry the weight of your own power, that weight does not vanish. It is transferred to the collective, fueling the madness of the massa. Look around you. The world is not suffering from a lack of resources or information. It is suffering from a catastrophic failure of individuation. Millions are projecting their internal chaos, their unintegrated complexos autonomos, onto political systems, onto strangers, onto any convenient screen. This is how quickly the seek can unravel when it rejects the cold, hard truth of its own constitution. We are standing at the edge of the abysmo. This is not hyperbole. When the conscious structure is too weak to hold the contents of the inconsciente collettivo, the floodgates open. You don't just feel sad or discouraged. You become structurally compromised. The neurose is the signal that the system is failing, that the psychological integrity is shattered. Most people, tragically, treat the signal instead of the underlying disease. They chase comfort, distraction, or external validation, trying to patch up a crumbling foundation with superficial fixes. But you cannot negotiate with the inconsciente. It is an objective reality, brutal and indifferent to your feelings or your excuses. It demands integration, or it guarantees ruina. The choice before you is stark, clinical, and binary. Choosing consciousness means accepting the fardeau. It means agreeing to the terrifying responsibility of your own existence. It demands a ruthless self-analysis that few possess the stomach for. You must become the physician who performs surgery on himself, cutting away the dead tissue of the old persona and the comfortable lies you have used to shield yourself from your own potential. This path requires sacrificio, the sacrificio of comfort, the sacrificio of belonging to the massa, and crucially, the sacrificio of your victim identity. When you step into your power, when you integrate that golden shadow, you lose the right to blame circumstances. You become accountable for every outcome, good or bad. This is the true terror of success. Not the work, but the absolute sovereignty it confers. This path is paved with solidum. Individuation is a solitary endeavor. There is no collective therapy for the ultimate task of becoming yourself. The analyst can only guide you to the door. You must walk through the fire alone. Those who embrace this fardeau become architects of their own conscientia. They are the psychological elite, the few who manage to navigate the current epidemic of neurose without succumbing to the collective insanity. The alternative is the path of least resistance, clinging to the neurotic comfort of the familiar. This is the path of psychological suicide. If you refuse the confrontation, if you suppress the urgency of the pressure cooker feeling, the unintegrated contents will not simply vanish. They will organize themselves into increasingly powerful complexos autonomos. These complexes are fragments of your own psyche that have achieved a dangerous autonomous will. They begin to run your life from the shadows, compelling you toward repetition, the addiction to losing, the sudden illness before the breakthrough, the impulsive destruction of relationships that threaten to pull you into a higher level of existence. If the pressure is not released through conscious integration, the seek dies fractures. This is the origin of the modern mental breakdown. It is the sound of millions giving up the enormous fardo of consciencia and dissolving back into the primal soup of the collective massa. They choose the temporary comfort of the illusion over the brutal truth of reality. They choose repression over responsibility. They choose ruina. Do not misunderstand this warning. This is not philosophy. This is clinical diagnosis. The consequences of Path B are measurable, predictable, and devastating. You will not merely fail to win. You will be wiped out by your own repressed power. The decision is yours, and yours alone. The clock is ticking. The signs of readiness, the pressure, the withdrawal, the darkness, are not accidents. They are the final warning flares. Ignore them and you commit psychological suicide. Stop procrastinating on your own existence. Stop clinging to the comfort of your old defeat. The time for analysis is over. The time for action is now. Face the sombra, embrace the solidão, and accept the cold, hard truth. You are responsible for everything that happens next. This is not a request. This is the final diagnosis. Wake up, or be erased by the very contents you sought to hide. For those few capable of bearing the intellectual and existential weight of individuation, subscribe now. The collective neurosis is a contagious disease, and only those willing to stand apart can survive the coming breakdown.